Wonderful. Welcome everyone to the first MUNers Across Borders MAB Connect event of the 2024-2025 season, all about advocacy and action. We're here today to discuss with two incredible speakers who are well known and well integrated to the advocacy and action world in their respective fields, a little bit about some of their work in their respective fields and also their suggestions and ideas for others who might want to get involved into it. My name is Philippe Lefebvre. I'm the Managing Director of MUNers Across Borders, and we are an organisation that is there to improve the connection between international organisations and young people through simulation. So Model UN, Model EU, Model African Union, Model OAS, all over the world. We run an annual summit every year, and as this event attests, we have a community project that brings together speakers and individuals from around the world, both from a young professional background, students, and more. I will be moderating the event, but I do want to give our wonderful community director, Uni, the floor to explain a little bit more about the event and a little bit more about MAB Connect. Uni.
Thank you so much. My name is Uni Moltebach. I'm the community director here at MUNers Across Borders. I'm also really excited to kick off this first event of the year on advocacy and action. The event is going to last a bit less than 2 hours, now maybe even a little bit shorter, more an hour and a half-ish. We're going to be inspired by some great panelists who have some youth-led initiatives, and we're going to learn how to turn our great ideas and visions into real action. Our amazing panel consists of, well, for now, Ronelle King, UN youth leader and founder of Life in Leggings, and Eric Balakrishnan, president of Yes Europe. They will first discuss their different initiatives and journeys into advocacy and action for about half an hour or 45 minutes or so. And then there'll be an Q&A as well, where you can ask all your questions. After that, we'll have a bit of a practical toolkit session led by Eric to really dive into how we can go about turning our ideas into action and results for about 20 minutes. We have some really great panelists here. They're doing incredible work on youth advocacy and action. So we have a lot to look forward to over the next hour or so. I think I'll just pass the mic back to Philippe to moderate the rest of the event.
Of course. And then just to expand a little bit on what this is in the grander context, MAB Connect is our community network initiative, connecting both those who've done MUN, but also those who haven't, really, who are engaged. Applications will open to join this community soon and have more events like this. So as way as introduction, I will invite I will introduce our two speakers, and I'll make reference to our third, who might be joining later. I'm not entirely sure. But Ronelle King is a trailblazing advocate for gender equality and women's rights, known for founding Life in Leggings, which amplifies the voices of survivors of gender-based violence across the Caribbean. As a UN advocate, she is dedicated to advancing policies that protect women's rights and promote gender justice, inspiring change throughout her activism and empowering women globally. Eric Balakrishnan is president of Yes Europe, where he champions clean energy and sustainable development initiatives across Europe. Passionate about empowering young leaders, he works to drive innovation and energy solutions while advocating for a greener, more sustainable future, and his work inspires youth to take action on climate change and be leaders in the energy transition. And we hope that Ishan Shah will join us, who's a dedicated youth activist at the Summit for the Future, which, as many of you may know, was adopted this week at the UN General Assembly. So the way this session is going to work is we're going to start with some opening remarks, initial remarks, I would say, from Eric and then Ronelle. I'm going to be asking a few questions, just following up on these answers, and then we will go to a Q&A. So make sure to put your questions in the chat, and I'll make sure to relay them to our wonderful speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to go to Eric first, and then Ronelle, and then we'll kick it off there. So Eric, I believe you have some slides to share with us, am I correct?
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. As Philippe and Uni excellently introduced, my name is Eric Balakrishnan. I'm president of Yes Europe. I have prepared a short presentation that I would love to share with you all, if I can bring it up. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. So Yes Europe. Yes Europe is Yep, all good?
Perfect.
Perfect. Cheers. Yes, Europe is an NGO based in Geneva, in Switzerland. We're a completely remote NGO. We exist on the internet. Yes stands for Young Leaders in Energy and Sustainability. We were formed in 2016 by a few university students in Geneva, and we've grown since then into an organization which exists in multiple European countries, and we're well into the three figures for the amount of members that we have. So, as the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change report makes clear, there is no time for delay and no room for excuses. We need everyone involved to achieve the energy transition, and Europe, in a way, plays a really leading role in that, given that we are sort of the home where industrialization began, and we sort of kickstarted the process where climate change really began. And it's really important that Europeans in general, but people all over the world also come together to achieve this and help catalyze actions towards a sustainable future. We want to accelerate the energy transition, but mainly as what we do on a day-to-day basis, we're a community of people, we're a network, and we're a platform. We want to connect, empower, and grow this platform for young leaders who are passionate about energy and sustainability across Europe. How do we do this? So, like I said before, we exist as a community network platform. We aim to empower youth to accelerate the energy transition. We're an NGO specifically for young people, but we sort of have like an age bracket of people who are between the ages of 18 and 35. So we could have students and young professionals who are in an organization, but then people who are sort of really well established in a career, who are the ones really driving change in industry. The most important thing that we try to prioritize is knowledge about energy and sustainability. And then from that, we can grow different projects in order to innovate and spread the word about what we'd like to achieve. How we work. So yes, Europe is a flat pyramid. We don't necessarily have a hierarchy. Obviously, as the president, I'm in a way in the middle of the organization. But the idea is that all of our members are leaders in their own right. They're leaders in their professional world, and they're leaders in their own personal lives as well for driving change. From a kind of technical point of view, we obviously have a strategy and operations team. So you'd expect sort of like our board would be in the middle, consisting of myself as president, my vice president, Max, my CFO, Arnav, and then a few operation leaders. And then we're sort of broken down into an events team who attend events and externalize Yes Europe, a finance and partnership team who fundraise and try to look for sponsors for our projects and events. Our actual project management team, which I'll share a little bit about some of the projects that we're involved in this year. Our communications team, who runs our PR and our social media. Our policy team, whose responsibility is to research policies and come up with informative ways of educating the public. And then finally, my favorite team, which is the country representatives team. So Yes Europe works in a very unique way in which that we have specific local team subsidiaries in various European countries. So you'd imagine that we have Yes Europe, and then Yes Europe Italy, Yes Europe France, Yes Europe Germany, etc. And each of them are run by a country representative who's sort of like an ambassador, but they lead their individual local team on behalf of Yes Europe. In 2024, we had active representation in 21 countries, each organizing their own events and projects or forming part of initiatives. The countries highlighted are the ones we currently have active representation in. The ones which aren't highlighted, we either used to have representation or we don't really have active representation anymore. It's not a negative thing. It just means that they sort of achieved what they wanted to achieve within a short period of time. And we might have a future iteration of that team in the future. On a personal level, I used to be the country representative of Yes Europe Malta, which is my home. And then last year, I finished a 2-year term as a team member with the Maltese team. And I was offered the opportunity to run for the president of Yes Europe. And I became elected in February this year. And I'll serve a 2-year term until February 2026. So what do we do? The major event that we attend every year is the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP. We made the decision to go to COP27 a couple of years ago in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then last year we were represented by, from left to right, Jeremy Gideon Jayachandran, who was our knowledge sharing lead, Laya Huitart, who is currently our operations manager, and then the tall man on the other tall man on the right is Max van der Linden, who at the time was a finance team member, but now he's actually our vice president. We have a delegation going to COP29 in Baku this November. It will be led by two new members of ours, Inez and Elizabeth, and they attended SB60 in Bonn early this year to begin that process. Each year we have an annual conference, so it started all the way in Lucerne in Switzerland in 2016, and the latest one was in 2023 in Athens at the Impact Hub. We are about to announce our 2024 Belgian conference. It is going to be quite late in the year because we've had some complications, but there will be an announcement about it very soon, and it's expected to be in November. International events, so these are some of the events that we've attended this year in 2024. We were at the Change Now Summit, which is a sustainability transition conference in Paris. It was attended by Golnoush, who was our French country representative. We had Carolina and Dimitris at the European Sustainability Energy Week in Brussels. And then Regeneration 2030, the man holding a microphone in the pink polo is Dimitris, who's our policy team lead, which is a young climate activist regional event in Reykjavik. Some upcoming international events that we have is the European Youth Energy Forum in Budapest, that will be attended by our Hungarian team. The European Youth Energy Network is a mother organization that we are actually members of, along with 15 other organizations. And each year they have a huge event where we go and meet other organizations, and we will be represented at that this year. The Nordic Baltic Youth Summit in Vilnius actually kicks off tomorrow, and Dimitris is at that one. And then either next month or the month after, because it might have been postponed, we're invited to the Green Energy Career Day, which is an eco-business fair in Berlin. It's an opportunity for green companies to meet young people, to find talent to recruit to their companies. And we have 5 complimentary tickets for it as well, which actually we signed an MOU for about an hour ago, and we're happy to sort of distribute them amongst our members to attend on our behalf.
What a salesman, Eric.
Thank you. Cheers. I had to come back from work just to sign that contract. Some of the projects that we're engaged in this year. So one of the big projects is a project called Power Youth. It's this huge consortium which aims to empower youth to support energy communities. It is run by a Greek partner who actually at the moment we're trying to see whether they can be one of our partners long-term after this workshop. Our 2 members, part of it are Mirren and Martina. The Women in Energy Transition Project, where we promote female role models in the energy sector. So it's basically an interview series. We speak to basically women in the energy sector, whether it's politicians or students or CEOs of companies. It's been quite a good running series, but we are at the moment looking for candidates to interview. So if you'd like to approach us to obviously showcase your work in the energy sector, we'd be happy to give you a platform to talk about your stuff. The Sustainability Yes Talks is a podcast run by Yes Europe Greece. It is completely in Greek, so if you speak Greek and are interested in sustainability, feel free to tune into that. And then the behind the scenes of the energy transition, which the Italian team has collaborated with a company called Arduat to allow young people to see what the energy transition is really like in one of Italy's biggest companies. Some upcoming projects that we have in years to come. We're in the process of signing an MOU with an African consortium to run a collaborative project bilaterally between our 2 continents to discuss how the energy transition might expand to Africa. The Future of Energy Report 2024 is going to be published this year. It's basically a report that we write every year, every 2 years, where we get opinions about EU's energy future from different EU member states. The EESC Youth Test is a cooperation with the European Economic Social Committee. We've just agreed to that, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to go out for us, but we'll have some updates for it soon on social media. And then finally, the European Policy Map, which is such a new project that we don't actually have any branding for it yet. But basically, it is going to be an analysis of green innovations, the climate action initiatives. It'll be kicking off next year, where it's basically going to be like a storyboard of different members that we have telling us about the different European policies, different energy policies in their countries. Our impact. So like I said, we have delegations at COP27, COP28, and COP29. We anticipate we'll be at COP30 next year, which is at the Amazon in Brazil. We've reached 8,000 followers on LinkedIn and 1,000 followers on Instagram, I believe, last week. We've had about 20 plus publications in energy sustainability, and we've attended 10 plus international local events this year. So yeah, let's keep in touch. We're that's our website link over there. We're also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Discord. If you'd like to join our Discord, there's an invite link on our website. If you go down to join our community, you can automatically join our Discord. You don't have to be a member, but you can be part of our conversation and obviously just learn about opportunities and meetups that we have.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for giving me the time to promote Yes Europe.
Thank you. Well, I will definitely come back in a moment about your specific sort of interest in advocacy and action. But I do want to turn to Ronelle. Ronelle, perhaps, we got a nice sense of an organisation, what it does. I think, what we're looking for as well is a bit more of how people got to this stage. So very keen on hearing, where did it start for you? The Life in Leggings is an extremely powerful initiative. And I think we'd all very much like to know a bit more about how you got there and what worked. Over to you, Ronelle. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can well.
Can you hear me clearly? Okay.
We can.
So first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you, Eric, for that riveting presentation. It was very informative. Made me look at my presentation slides and be like, am I prepared?
You are getting a little quiet there, Ronelle. It's sort of going in and out.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps like
Right.
that.
Can you
Okay.
hear me
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So, how did I begin? So, what I'd like to begin is the environment at the time, because I think the environment is pretty important to telling the story of why this moment happened and why it felt needed to be created. So in 2016, on the 24th of November, this would have been the day before the 16 days of activism, the launch. Um, we were having conversations as a nation in Barbados around different forms of gender-based violence. There was a lot of reporting around women talking about incestuous violence, women talking about sexual harassment, um, and how the backlash that they were getting as a result of being brave enough to talk about these experiences. So openly, women had lost their homes, um, by confronting violence that occurred in their family that they didn't get justice for. And so I felt as though, we were having all these conversations, but it was either we were having them in silos, they were seen as isolated incidences, but more importantly, the survivors who were coming forward were experiencing major backlash, whether from the victim, or rather from the perpetrators, whether from those who you would think would protect them, whether it be their family. And so I felt there was a need for a space where we could have a conversation meaningfully around gender-based violence, what it looks like, how prevalent it is, and the impact on the lives of those women and girls who live not only in the country but the region. And so I messaged a friend. I told him I had this idea, and we workshopped a name, which ended up being Life in Leggings. And the reason we decided on that name was obviously it's heavy on alliteration, but more so it's a conversation starter of, um, that it doesn't matter what you wear, that is not a reason for GBV. Um, and so how it started was me just posting my first personal experience with GBV on social media and using the hashtag, and a lot of women resonated with it. Women across the Caribbean who I've never met had similar experiences and felt very empowered to do the same under the hashtag. It was very organic, no direction, and it kind of caught fire. I went to bed the nighttime and woke up and it was very viral, which I had been in advocacy before, but I'd never led an organization at the time. I was very comfortable being a volunteer, just, keeping my head down, doing the work. So now I had been thrust into the spotlight and had to kind of learn very quickly and keep up with the movement, that was clear was very needed, but also something that hadn't been done before because Me Too only happened a year after.
Mm.
So it caught fire. It went from Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Dominica, Guyana, And it started to inspire spin-off movements, even Leve, Dominican, Dominica, Tambourine Army, Jamaica. Um, and what we realized was that there was not only like this wide variety of GBV that we were documenting, but we were creating a safe space for women who had never broken their silence on this issue, and they were doing it in the most public way. So they had to have a lot of faith in us, or faith in the movement, essentially, to do that. So we decided to host our first town hall where people in Barbados um, came to the University of West Indies so that we could talk about what is needed moving forward from this movement. And what came out of that town hall was that women in Barbados and those who live streamed from across the region, they wanted an organization that understood the socioeconomic complexities of Caribbean women, and what the intersections of how they experience GBV. So, for example, religious minorities don't experience GBV the same as a queer individual or a sex worker, or, and they wanted an organization that was representative, that had these intersectional feminist principles, and it was largely youth led. And so we decided to formalize Life in Leggings from a hashtag to a nonprofit. Very shortly after that, we started plotting and scheming for our first project, and it was supposed to be this project in which we took the conversation from online to offline. It was called Reclaim Our Streets Women's Solidarity March. And so we took to the streets in 7 Caribbean countries, with a declaration, with demands as it relates to key stakeholders, whether it be government, whether it be the private sector, public sector, civil society, in terms of understanding that it's everybody's responsibility to address this issue, and how we can, work together to do that. We had the bullet points of increasing funding towards a shelter. There's only one shelter in Barbados. In some countries at the time, they didn't even have any shelter for survivors of GBV. So it was a coordinated effort in that regard. And so that day, International Women's Day 2017, hundreds of women took to the streets and reclaimed it. What we experience as Caribbean women in public spaces is a very intense sexual harassment and intimidation that make the streets very unsafe to walk on, and you feel very uncomfortable in the space. And so for them, it was very powerful to assert that, they have a right to be here and to be in public spaces without fear of gender-based violence. And what came from that was that it emerged as one of the largest civil society simultaneous marches that occurred. It was inducted into the Barbados Museum. Afterwards, we decided to engage in legislative and policy reform. So we engaged with the UN system. That was our first time. We wrote 2 civil society reports for the Universal Periodic Review and the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And from that experience, we were able to convince the government, with the help of the CEDAW committee, to pass legislation that was pending for at least 20 years. So from that, we got the Employment Sexual Harassment Act. After that, from that experience in engaging persons in government, we recognized that a lot of the faces were very male. And a lot of the issues that we were talking about, a lot of them didn't understand or relate to. And devoid of women's leadership, especially young women's leadership in the space, and the value that could come from this space when you have these stakeholders there. And so we launched our first long-term project, which runs every year. It's called Pink Parliament, which it seeks to increase women's participation in politics, but to mentor young girls with the assistance of women who are currently in politics, women who have been in politics, but to develop their confidence as well to champion legislation that they're passionate about the issues that affect them as adolescent girls, as teenagers, as young women, and just as women as they get older. Um, since then, since that started in 2019, we've started to see some outcomes from that. Up to a few days ago, our first cohort member, she was just appointed to the National Security Council, um, the in the for the government of Barbados, the Advisory Council. She's the youngest board member, so that is a brilliant win for us. Um, as we continue through this work, we realized that there was also a need to involve men and boys into the conversation, but in a way in which they understood their role in ending GBV, that is not like a doing a favor for women, that this is long work in unlearning patriarchal masculinities, because these issues not only affect women and girls, but they also affect the lives of men. Um, and so it's basically building allyship to address this issue. And so we found this project called Redefining Masculinities, in which men and boys engage in the work to, again, challenge patriarchal masculinities so that they could form themselves as better allies in this work, challenging how to, interrogating rather, how to create that gender just society, how to not frame themselves as protectors of women, but to stand with women in understanding that we just want to be safe in these spaces. We are not looking for protectors. We're asserting the right to nonviolence. Um, and most recently, under the Obama Scholars Program that I was accepted to, they gave us a year to study at Columbia University to explore the intersections between the climate crisis and GBV. So that is a project that we'll be launching next year, in which we work to bring together climate advocates and gender advocates to work together on advancing more gender responsive climate action and policy.
Amazing. Ronelle, I must say that all of the initiatives that you've worked on, I've seen to be so incredibly impactful, and I just don't know how one person can do it. Um, Thank you so much. It was a really interesting introduction to the work you've done, how you started. I want to start with a question to you, and then Eric, I'll go to you about sort of what brought you into it. You mentioned something how that transition between being an activist to running an organization was quite a big leap for you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please sort of elaborate a bit on that? What were some of the main challenges and differences? What did you like and not like about that?
So I guess one of the major challenges was finding and building a team that believed in your vision, that understood what you were trying to build. I think when we first started, we had a lot of people who they wanted to play a major part into the organization and its mission, but I didn't think that their values aligned with what the organization set out to task. So, for example, we follow the principles of, like Audre Lorde, and, understanding that, you know, just no one lives a single issue life.
Hmm.
So, for example, it's going to be quite difficult to be in the organization and help the organization fulfill its goal if you have biases towards, let's say, sex workers, or, this is meant to be a safe space for all women and all gender non-conforming individuals. And so we had to do some introspection and really had to focus on how we were recruiting. Can't take everybody, but also training,
Mm.
lots and lots of training. Because it was important to build the capacity of the persons who are working in the organization or volunteering, but understanding that we're at the core of it, we're trying to engage in behavioral change. And so, it was important for them to understand not just where the organization stood, but again, how they can grow in this movement that we're trying to build, this change this societal change that we're trying to orchestrate. Um, and I think the second biggest challenge was funding.
Oh yeah.
Um, of, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but not just funding, the capacity.
Yeah.
Um, as young leaders to form an organization and apply for like these massive grants that they're asking for. I am mute. They're asking for your firstborn child. They're asking for
Yeah.
like all these things. And you probably started off with like three people in the room with an idea, hope, and a dream, you know. You don't have the capacity to apply for these large grants, you know, and all that they're asking of you. And so, what I was grateful for was that immediately when we started, UN Women Caribbean saw our potential and trained us, but also the amazing young leaders across the Caribbean that I've had the pleasure of meeting in different programs, conferences. I can call them up and be like, I have a deadline. I am overwhelmed. Um, we have staff, but we don't have the capacity to submit this deadline on time. Could you lend me your skills and I will lend you mine when you need it, you know? That's how we tend as young people to get things done. But also the nonprofits that recognize these issues and work to provide training for organizations like mine so that this was not something that we had to rely on forever, that we did have eventually that capacity. Um, the issue again of funding, Barbados being middle income, so we're not considered for a lot of funding. So it meant that we had to learn to pivot fundraising and reaching out to philanthropic organizations or philanthropists, you know, to be generous and give to our work. So those are some of the challenges that I'll mention.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful, and I can attest to a small level everything you've said, but I can only imagine how much harder it's been for you, and still having managed to do so much is incredible. Eric, pivoting to you now, I'd like to maybe throw that same question a little bit, you know, because obviously you came up through that kind of country system of yes, you've been involved before, but if I could start a little with that, you know, can I take you back to the very first bit of quote unquote activism you did? What was that, and what did that feel like to you?
Um, I think, well, I'm a Maltese native, and we've seemed to be at war with the environment basically from day one in this country. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in general when it comes to the fight towards sustainability is just resourcefulness, and it's the making the most out of resources and space as a resource. And being a very tiny island nation, that's always been a big issue. So you've always had this kind of battle between developing your infrastructure and then finding a sustainable way to do it. And Malta has not done it in a good way. So I think the first time that I probably got involved in activism was when Extinction Rebellion, which is an incredibly famous kind of social activist group, quite a destructive one, but they were very active a few years ago. Their cell in Malta had quite a big amount of prominence, and I knew a number of people who sort of engaged in that. Professionally, I've studied. I did my master's in green chemistry and sustainability, and now I work as a business consultant. Where I like professionally, that's my job. I try to improve businesses to see if they can get sort of certified with different things. So I think I've I had a journey when it comes to things like sustainability as a basis. My basis for it has been just common sense. Just like this should be the thing as our species that we should be fighting for the most over anything. But I think the reality is that somebody who gets invested in things quite easily, and if there is a lot of value that I can sort of get from it or generate from it, I'm just going to keep on pouring my own value into it. And that's sort of how this whole Yes Europe thing started. I joined it on a whim at the start of 2022. I'd just come back from Malta because I got a really good job in Malta, so I came back here. Somebody who I did my bachelor's with introduced me to the Maltese team at the time, so I very much so started at the very bottom of the organization. Within a year, the person who led our Maltese team, her name is Carla Gallia, she got a job at the Maltese United Nations mission in New York, so she moved to New York. So I succeeded her to lead the Maltese team. And then I was in charge of the Maltese team for all of 2023. And our president's term came to an end and I campaigned and I won. So it's I'd say like a lot of these things are unprecedented. Like I appreciate that to be in a position where I can be a leader, like it is a big responsibility, but you need a lot of like fortune and things to go your way, and you can work really hard. There's so many people who work far harder than me in the organization. I can't really stand up to them, but maybe they don't get, I guess, the amount of credit or the amount of value out of the organization as much as maybe people in higher ranking positions, if that makes any sense. So no, I'm incredibly fortunate, and I think it's good that we are an organization where we really recognize how fortunate we are to be in a place where we can be sort of vocal with our voices. The fact that we're a politically neutral organization as well means that we don't really get caught up in all of the, I guess, the noise. So it helps us for us to sort of operate in a space where we can just talk about energy and sustainability from a kind of technical point of view and an informative point of view without going into that world. And the other part of it is as well is that we're registered in Switzerland as it stands. So being a Swiss-based organization, we can't delve into that. However, economically for us at the moment, it's not the most beneficial thing being involved in Switzerland because we're not eligible for many EU schemes. So it might be a proposition for the future for Yes Europe to relocate to an EU member state. But for the time being, we're quite happy being where we are. But as we grow and expand and maybe diversify what we're offering as an organization, that could be something for the future.
Thank you very much. Indeed, being a Swiss-based organization is not something many of us experience, but there are difficulties. And Ronelle, you mentioned, being in Barbados doesn't necessarily make it easy. We have experiences being in Belgium, being in the UK. So now is the time for sort of audience questions, but also I want to recognize that we have some fantastic activists in the call as well. Now, Cecilia is president of the Young European Movement in the UK. She's also a gender-based violence activist, anti-gender-based violence activist. And I wanted to yield to you for a minute or two about your experience as well, before I believe you have to leave. Cecilia, over to you.
Thanks, Philippe. Yes, thanks very, very much, Philippe. And I just want to say hi and how impressed I am at all of your overviews, particularly you, Ronelle. That was brilliant to hear. And in terms of my own experiences, so as a kind of background, so I'm a director in UK government, but here in my capacity as president of YEM, that is partnered with Jeff Europe and European Movement. So together we represent about 50,000 people across different umbrella organizations. And basically we work on strengthening UK-EU relations. But so I've been pivoting our campaign. You probably hear a lot in the news about youth mobility. That's all us. That was all of us last year. So that's kind of gone viral in the kind of campaign activism scene. And I handpicked a female majority board, I'll be honest with you. And we've been pivoting to doing a campaign on gender-based violence, which I've stuck in the chat if anyone is willing to support, hopefully so. And Ronelle, like you say, very willing to support whatever you do because it is all about collaboration. But basically, I've been kind of campaigning, advocating, speaking and writing articles in this space for about 10 years. And I can only imagine what other people's experiences are. But to give you a quick example, whilst in our EM National Council and our EM exec chat, only the other day I said, so we're electing our next president. And I said, I think we should have our first female president. And hey, we have barely any diversity on any of our boards. And they go, I don't think we should discriminate. I don't think we should, cancel out men or, like that would be really highly prejudicial. And myself and my vice president are just like reading this exec chat being like, wow, okay, we are in 2024. So anyway, as you may know, 1 woman is killed every 3 days in the UK and 2 daily across the EU member states. I did a really good event with Frances Fitzgerald MEP last year, who passed the EU directive, wide legislation on this. So she's obviously my heroine. And Ellen O'Malley Dunlop. So she's a good name to know. She's vice president of the Grevio Committee, which deals with the Istanbul Convention. And basically, she inspired this campaign, Break the Silence to End the Violence, on destigmatizing talking about victims' experiences. Because we'll probably all know the stats, but in the UK, it's 98% of women have been sexually harassed. So basically, we came up with this year. We're now in stakeholder outreach phase. So just sending out the campaign, trying to get our partners to support us. We've been told that gender-based violence activism is not very politically palatable. Those are some of the comments we've received. Even today, on trying to get it in some of the newspapers, we've had pushback saying, oh, well, Brexit Watch is really lighthearted. So, we can't even include your art competition on it, which is obviously a really lovely, inclusive thing to be doing. So I suppose I find that when I meet a lot of resistance, and it is invariably white men who are often older, shocker there, I just make sure I am open and honest about that with my stakeholders, with my members, and with people like you, where I say, do you know what? It can be really hard sometimes. It can be really difficult. But I think when you share those experiences and go, well, this sucked today, we didn't get this where we wanted it to go, but others share theirs, your vulnerability can be your power. And you can feel a lot more supported knowing that other people are going through the same thing. So on that note, I'll end. But yeah, really interested. I personally annoyingly have to go to an embassy event. But
okay.
Thank you very, very much.
I have you for one question, maybe? Celia?
Okay, one question.
Okay. I want to drill down on this issue of virality. To what extent have you found, and I might ask Eric and Ronelle to pick this up after you, to what extent have you found that you've had to go viral or get big communication campaigns to have any effect, even though your actual advocacy and the work you want to do is identical, but you've had to market and go viral in order for it to do so?
Yeah, so perfect example. All the youth mobility stuff. Last year, our campaign was on Erasmus Plus. Let's rejoin it. We created a campaign video called Embrace Erasmus. Our partner organization, we sent this to them. We iterated for thousands of hours. And they initially came up with a competing campaign, bearing in mind we're the same organization, called Unlock Erasmus. After saying they'd support our campaign, they did not. Theirs flopped, ours didn't, because we did loads of stakeholder outreach. So we got the British Youth Council to support us. It then reached 44,000 signatures, got the backing of Sadiq Khan, 5 MEPs and 2 MPs, and that's now just, on a broad church scale, huge. And it made it into 2 manifestos for this general election. So, I've just come back from Labour conference, and all of the panels are just getting asked, what's happening with youth mobility? What's happening? So I think you have to kind of just go around and above if people are pushing back on you, because I think if we'd taken no for an answer, we would have gotten absolutely nowhere. Mm-hmm. And actually now our partner organization is saying to us, well, you're really credible. We're getting lots of media requests for you. And actually they were taking those media requests until I did. Yeah. So fun tangent. 18 out of 24 media requests for us on youth mobility were being taken by one white man who was the chair of our partner organization. But obviously I called that out in the exec chat. But yes, it's an uphill struggle.
Thank you. Cecilia, great to hear from you. Thanks for joining. And indeed, I'll happily connect you too.
To quickly say, Leah is on this call. She's in my board, wonderful. And she's great. Do come to her. Hey, Leah.
Great. Say ciao for now, Cecilia, but I'm sure we'll hear more from her in future events and organizations. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and I'll ask them. But I'd like to continue on that kind of question I had, maybe to Cecilia, to Ronelle if I can, in terms of communication. We can have the best ideas, but communicating them can be literally half the battle. And with your experience with, again, great ideas, what have you found has worked or has not worked when it came to communicating them and indeed, advocating for them, but very much in a sense of trying to get it in front of people, trying to get it aware?
So as it relates to our communications, we engage in strategy. So we try to sit and think before we release a statement, what impact this is going to have, but also plan for risk in terms of if it doesn't have the impact that we think it's going to have, what is the next step to gain people's attention on this issue or whatever advocacy point that we're trying to make. But another thing that we find to be very effective is a multi-prong approach. Not everybody receives information the same way. So we may release a press release on social media, but we would also release one to the media. We would also release one. We use in the global south WhatsApp a lot. So we send that viral across WhatsApp. We engage in different platforms. We, try to reach people where they are. If we have to go to the radio, we will get that information out that way too. But it really depends on the message that we're trying to get across, but also that has been most effective for us, recognizing that not everyone receives the information the same way, um, and having a strategy as it relates to risk. If it just doesn't reach, suppose we write a brilliant statement and the media doesn't decide to publish it, what then? You know? Um, but as it relates to communicating our messages, I found that, I guess, based on how we started, we had the support of the public. And so therefore, it wasn't that hard to receive the messages. You just have a few messages that may, based on people's particular sensibilities and biases, trying to be diplomatic.
Very political, yeah, diplomatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, they may reject it, and then we just have to reassert that if this has shocked you, then you don't know the organization to begin with and what we stand for. Like, we're not going to pivot from our message, and who we represent. All women deserve, this protection and our advocacy, and not only our advocacy, but spaces in which they can advocate for themselves. So, yeah, that is how we found it to work. But we've had few a few tips. And when Cecilia was speaking, she reminded me of like very like meetings where I would be invited to a meeting to talk about something really important, even like the same work as it relates to like gender-based violence and climate change. And then the entire time, the person who is a key stakeholder on this issue, a very powerful person on this issue, is talking to me about all kinds of random things. They're like almost talking around it, inserting different points. Like if I say, 80% of displaced people as it relates to climate disasters are women, they'd be like, but what about men? I'm like, but I didn't I didn't say nothing bad about men. I who do you think are the other, Um, so then you have to kind of remain on message and not get caught up, and you have to prepare for those types of things. Otherwise, you can get into a shouting match with that person. You lose the focus of why you were there. And depending on how well you prepare, you may actually, depending on the person, convince them. So, yeah, I think it's really just about preparing for risk.
That's the goal, isn't it? To convince. And I must admit, as a white man, I find my voice fairly well represented. It's not in my interest to keep that there. But I've similarly had it where, I've organised meetings sort of at the EU level and they've said, oh, let's bring a woman along. It's like, that's not the goal here. So it's very frustrating. I can imagine how bad it is for those projects dedicated to it. Eric, I want to get a bit more on that question of tailoring to audiences to you as well, especially because yes, Europe, you mentioned it yourself, you're looking at different audiences. You're not just there for young Europeans, you're not just there for those who are only engaged in energy sustainability, you'll have quite a broad audience. How do you manage to tailor your advocacy work with the different audiences involved?
With a lot of patience. Well, Well, the thing we have to always appreciate and come to terms with is that, yes, Europe is a huge NGO. We have representation in so many countries. And we find ourselves sort of having, I guess, like established policies and how we want to implement things, but then trying to communicate that in so many different countries with different cultures. So, the Balkans will have a different interpretation of activism compared to sort of Scandinavian countries. Now, we're trying to bridge the gap between cultures through the lens of energy and sustainability. And we want to be an attractive organization for those aspects. So we would never get somebody whose first thought is to be like destructive in terms of their activism join our organization. We'd always get people who want to create bridges. And I think specifically, we have people from genuinely former Yugoslav countries in leadership positions, and they all get along with each other. And that's never been sort of a question for us about like, we're always going to have cultural issues. It's like, you accept them, that's fine. But the reality is that there's a greater fight to be had in that sense. So, yes, for sure. And I think especially from my side as well, I mean, I'm from the southernmost European country, and a lot of the people I have to engage with are from Nordic countries. And I'm South Indian, but I'm also Mediterranean, and we have a certain way of kind of talking to people. So then that doesn't really translate when you're talking to people from like Finland, for example, who are very minimalistic in their social conversations. But at the same time, yeah, I think you start with what we're here to do, which is to have cool conversations about like energy development, like why is sort of hydrogen energy not being explored in the way it's being done? Why is the fact that nuclear research is being decommissioned rather than being expanded? These are the types of conversations that we'd rather be having in a completely non-controversial manner. And I think if we build from that, we'll be in a good place. And I think the fact that next year, yes, Europe will enter its 9th year in existence, and we're still going strong. We still have, hundreds of members. We're still sort of having our annual general assemblies. We're still having international events. It shows that young people are still sort of committing towards this fight. And I think the key thing here is that the organization has grown as its members have grown. So we would have been founded by university students. And 8 years later, these people are well-established sort of entrepreneurs in their own right. And they sort of advocate that and abdicate their positions for younger people to then continue that legacy. So we commit towards that. We're very meritocratic in that sense. And we just sort of supercharge what's been working and just continue to build on that and potentially diversify.
Amazing. Ronelle, I'm not sure how much longer you'll be able to stay with us. I know you've been very generous with your time. And I don't see any questions for you directly from the chat. So perhaps, I'll sort of end this panel discussion with the final question for both of you, and then we'll get into a little toolkit with Eric, if that's okay. And I guess that question is, how have you viewed the work of advocacy since you began to where it is now? What's improved and what hasn't in the amount of time you're doing? So Ronelle, you mentioned how sort of 2016 was when you started getting involved. Now I don't mean to sound like I'm aging anyone, but that's a good amount of years of quite consistent work, and it'd be interesting to know sort of how you've seen that change. And same for Eric. I mean, maybe you haven't been doing it quite as long, but you've seen energy sustainability work from the beginning to the end. What's changed, what hasn't, and where are you hopeful the trajectory will go? So Ronelle first.
Wow.
Easy question, right?
Well, 2016 leading it, I've been in it longer, which is scary now that you phrase it that way.
Same here.
Um, so I've seen it grow as it relates to like, I guess a key part of my work is like digital movements, digital feminisms, and seeing that grow and how impactful it has been, especially in the Caribbean, especially during times like COVID, where people couldn't take to the streets and mobilize, where they couldn't meet with their elected officials, but they were able to utilize social media or the internet platforms in which to demand change and create change, So I see it going in a really good trajectory and a very accessible trajectory because going back to the point of communications, when we recognized, for example, when we had our march and we were taking it offline, we recognized that not everybody was going to be able to turn up for the march, but they wanted to support, they wanted to assert the same declarations that we had. So we had to create slides for them to share, for them to. We don't really do things like call our elected officials because if you get someone to answer the phone on a good day, but what we do read emails. So through COVID, there was a movement that I didn't lead, but I supported, a movement supported called Protect Our Girls, which was around the juvenile detention center and how it needed to be reformed, how it was abusing the girls there. And they were able to largely orchestrate that movement on social media, have a virtual protest and everything. And what we contributed to was creating like letter writing campaign, but obviously by email. We created the templates for people who wanted to write, but just they've never engaged in advocacy before. They don't know what to write. They don't know who to write, what the emails are. So we did the entire thing for them. And they just had to, submit and add on if they wanted to. And that form of more accessible activism that we see more and more that is being spearheaded by young people like us, that takes advocacy in an amazing direction. And um, I think also um, just the innovation behind the ways in which we protest. Um, like, there are things that I see young people doing that I would have never guessed. And I count myself as a young person, by the way, but I mean the younger generation doing that I would have never guessed would have been our form of activism and an effective form of activism. I'm thankful that I live in a country where our prime minister and our government is very responsive, especially to what young people are um, talking about or championing. So, for example, we've had a lot of campaigns in which it didn't even get so far as to mobilize like branding. We kept so much noise on social media about it. The policy was reversed the next day. Um, so it's about, again, recognizing, and I tell people, and I teach this for our pink parliamentarians and other sessions as well, that not all advocacies are the same. You don't need to apply the same type of advocacy to every situation. You have to observe, strategize, and implement according to it. And that's how you get the most effective advocacy as well. And sometimes it just calls for coordinating, quarreling on social media, to get your elected officials to realize, hey, this is a strong voter bloc. This is a strong stakeholder, the youth, and they are not happy about this. And we've heard their concerns. And we think that they have a valid point, and we will reverse this. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ronelle. Eric, same question to you. Maybe sort of how do you see where it started, and maybe a focus on for you a bit more, and where would you like advocacy in action? And I'm not just talking about Yes Europe here. I'm talking maybe more broadly to go. What are some of the blockages you see now that you'd like to see changed in the future?
I think in order for advocacy and just sort of fighting for things to kind of have the same amount of energy, I think it just requires the personalities of people to lead that. You can have sort of a group of people with all of the skills, expertise, knowledge, experience, sort of education that you like. But the reality is that you're always going to have really good, smart, talented people operating these environments. And in order to pull together to, I guess, serve you in situations which are not quite ideal, it requires the personalities of people. So I think it's really important that that is the thing that we prioritize, and we don't want to drown leaders out with the established way to do things or the conventional ways to do things. I think you need innovative solutions to come out of tricky situations. So prioritizing people leading from the front and using their own personality that can bring other people and almost lead the way in that sense. I think that's the most crucial thing.
Wonderful.
I actually wanna add to Eric.
Please.
I think also having people who understand that this is bigger than self, because a lot of our movements are ruined by egos
Oh
and
yes.
people who have to lead. Like if they're not leading, then they don't want to be a part of it. I I quote to people as well that it takes all people to, fulfill a movement, to create a movement. And it's just about you finding your role in it. How do you think the flyers get done? You think the people leading it or the persons creating the flyers too? You all have, a very important role to play that keeps the cogs of the machine moving. Eh, And so it's just really you finding out that not everyone has to lead as well. You can be in the middle, you could be at the back, you could be online, you could be offline. It's just really realizing where do you add value and what skills do you have to offer to this. And again, understanding that this is bigger than self.
I think that's a really, really good point. And in fact, I might want to add to it culture. Building that culture in these organizations that promotes growth, but also the fact that things change for people. I think at the end of the day, a lot of advocacy is unfortunately volunteer, or at the very least, there's an aspect of volunteer, there's an aspect of coordinating it, and building a culture in which you can be open and understanding when people are going through difficult times, or they come on and they come off. And I think that we're all going to face that in a lot of our work. So this kind of ends, I would say, the panel part of it. I want to give a big sort of round of applause to our two speakers, and 2.5 with Cecilia coming through. Ronelle, you're very welcome to stay on, but equally, if you need to head, I believe you just got off the airplane, so you possibly want to freshen up. It was a real pleasure to have you, though. For those aware, we sadly couldn't have Ronelle at our summit, but I'm so happy that she joined us here, and I hope it's not the last we'll be seeing of you. So I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Of course, send me the invitation. I'll show up.
Thank you so much. For the rest, please stay. Please stay.
Okay.
Only Ronelle has the excuse of being able to leave. For all the rest, we have our toolkit session, to which I will yield once again to Eric Balakrishnan. Over to you.